Welcome back, everyone. Thank you all for coming back after that short break. We've got two more speakers to go before we have two more talks to go before we bring in Rick Doblin. So before Terry speaks, I just want to give a little bit of I want to give an anecdote of kind of a story that came out of putting this conference together. So when I first had this idea for this conference, I put together a list of speakers of people. Oh, hi. It's okay. Can people hear me? Cool. Okay. Okay, cool. That's fine. There we go. So what happened is let's a little bit quieter. Cool. Thank you. I have really sensitive ears. So what happened is I put together a list of speakers of people that I had met in the psychedelic community that I really thought were representations of Generation Y, who were like going to be the change makers of the future and the change makers of now. And I did this without my team of core volunteers because I still had this crazy mindset that somehow I could do this all by myself. And then I got a team of core volunteers. And after I got the team of core volunteers, they pointed out an oversight. They looked over the list of speakers and they're like, these speakers look great, and I'm wondering why we don't have a speaker of color. I think, and my initial response when they told me that was like, I don't even know any speakers of color in the psychedelic community. And I noticed that a lot of resistance came up in myself because I was like, I don't think we can find someone. I don't even know if we can afford one, da-da-da-da-da-da. But the core volunteers really pushed me to try and make this conference have more diversity. And one of the fears that came up with this is this idea of like, well, am I gonna be tokenizing? Am I gonna like be offensive, like reaching out to someone? And that was actually one of the elders in the psychedelic community told me that might be happening. And I ended up disregarding that advice. And we sent an email out to the MAPS graduate listserv, and Terry responded. And I bring this story up too because I feel like issues of diversity are really important right now, especially within psychedelic culture. With that, I want to introduce you, Terry Gotham. Yeah.
Hi. Okay, loudness, cool. So this is actually the first time I am speaking with my face uncovered. This is kind of a weird thing, but it's something that I wanted to describe, and I wasn't sure how, because it's easy for individuals of privilege to talk about psychedelics very openly because they have a different risk profile in this country. Just to show you a little bit of my history, I write for a couple of different EDM websites based in the United States. I have my own where I talk about drug policy. The reason why I post about drug policy on my own website is because no dance music or festival blogs are willing to carry it. They find that it's too risky. I got my bachelor's at Johns Hopkins and my master's at Columbia, where I studied psychology and clinical psychology the entire way through, and I did my master's thesis on ibogaine, an anti-addictive hallucinogen, psychedelic from sub-Saharan Africa that is tremendously, hopefully, effective in treating opiate addiction. I've also been to Burning Man and Ultra Music Festival and Electric Zoo, so I'm not trying to come at this from an intellectual, ivory tower perspective. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my experiences as a minority music attendee, producer, and someone that talks about the culture as a reporter, interviewer, etc. I wanted to talk a little bit about specifically focusing on the new generation of synthetic psychedelic substances that are only now being discussed in the research literature, but are already killing people in the dance music community. And finally, I'd like to talk about my own personal feelings about what dance music and psychedelic culture has become, that being that, in my opinion, the dance floor has become the new cathedral. And I'll have some additional questions for you guys to argue about over coffee once this is done. So 4 years ago, I was working in mental health. I was working at the only publicly funded homeless shelter for veterans in the country, and I had, when I was hired, I was told I'd have a caseload of 20. That quickly doubled. And because of the fact that I had mental health experience, I was given the worst of the worst. Substance abusers, sex offenders, like violent mental illness, and a whole lot of that together. But at night, I was also a party producer. For anyone that's based in San Francisco, they may know Rhythm Society. I threw East Coast versions of Rhythm Society parties for 2 years. They were donation-based 100%. We didn't sell alcohol, which both caused and solved problems for us. And we also had a very rudimentary form of the Zendo called spiritual emergence. This was very, very similar to the ways of psychedelic harm reduction that have been described previously and led to lots of interesting stories, like a wife of a 55-year-old coming up to me and saying that the guy did too much ketamine and we needed to fix it. And we realized that not only did we have to perform psychedelic harm reduction, but we have to perform psychedelic geriatric harm reduction, which, you know, the cardiovascular systems of a 55-year-old are a little bit different than a 20-year-old. Oh, sorry, that graph before was about veterans and basically just how terrible their mental health structures were. Yeah, 2 years ago, I was working at a very conservative surgical medical department in New York City. And this is an organization, it's a standard hospital, that I was drug tested to get a job at. And I spent most of my days doing pretty boring technology. I mean, you know, surgical, IT, AV, etc. But no one at my job knew what I did. There was no understanding that I was interested in psychedelics or parties or anything like that, because there were very real ramifications and consequences if they did. And that's one of the reasons why the concept of Terry Gotham was born. The first name, Terry, is actually a reference to Terry versus Michigan, the Supreme Court case that essentially legalized stop and frisk in the late 60s. And Gotham is obviously the more fundamentally dangerous version of New York City that a lot of us remember. Also through events there where we focused a little bit more on the retail aspect of it, and as you know, once money gets brought in, it becomes much less psychedelic. To explain why we hide in plain sight, you know, lots of individuals that you may know that are famous in Hollywood, LA, etc., do not use their given names. You know, Jamie Foxx, that's not his name. As a matter of fact, this is Common. Common, during the Oscars, they deployed his actual name, which has nothing to do with his stage name, his brand, his persona. And we're so used to people using their stage names that when you hear someone's real name, it becomes kind of jarring, and you don't really know how to deal with it. You can't really see this, so I'm going to move past it. Basically, this is a breakdown of electronic dance music attendees by race. The percentages and essentially the indices mean that if it's over 100, that means that this race is more well represented in the electronic dance music community than the regular general population. As you can see, African Americans are slightly more well represented, but not very much. Additionally, this is a somewhat similar tertiary point. This is a list of these are essentially the only female acts on Coachella and the largest music festival in the UK. Just to give people an understanding of the sheer lack of female representation in performance at dance music events. The reason why the hiding in plain sight is required is if you live in the United States, we now exist under a gigantic monitoring system. You know, this is a slide basically that was put forth by Edward Snowden that essentially if you use any of these websites, you can assume that everything that's said on them will be documented and recorded by the security apparatus of this country. And because of that fact, if you say the wrong things, you end up on one of the larger terrorist watch lists in the country. And the reason why I brought this up is because if you look on the right side, the vast, vast majority of individuals that are on these watch lists are not actually associated with a recognized terrorist organization like Al-Qaeda or ISIS or whatever. You're just on the list because they said so. That means that certain people that have certain views held publicly are now being tracked, just in case you didn't know that this was already happening. And you know, what are the consequences of that? You know, this is a little bit of a lateral move, but in New York City, stop and frisk is a real thing. One of the reasons why I'm wearing a suit is because when I wear a suit, it's much less likely that the cops are going to ruin my day, even if I haven't done anything. But it becomes part of your awareness and part of your public persona to kind of carry yourself differently in the public sphere, which now includes the online community. And not sure if you can read this, but these are the specific consequences. And these are taken specifically from the FBI's website. In the last 20 years, the majority of the growth in arrests have been not only from just marijuana, but just marijuana possession. We're arresting the same number of dealers, we're arresting the same number of manufacturers, but we're arresting like hundreds of thousands of more users. And that means that combined with online monitoring, the way that community policing has evolved, and all of these kinds of other factors, it becomes very, very difficult to maintain certain views publicly unless you have legal representation. And this is just a reminder that in the United States, that giant bar is us, and this is incarceration rates for every 100,000 people. And just in case you didn't know the difference between us and the developing world, it's pretty obvious from this. And by the way, this is from the Brookings Institute, a conservative think tank. But enough of the bad news. Why am I here? Why am I talking? Because this is what it looked like 40 years ago during Woodstock, and this is what it looks like now. So the number of people is kind of the same, but there are a couple of differences between then and now that I really wanted to focus on. Firstly, the idea of MDMA versus Molly. Last generation, during the rave generation, people took pressed pills, and those had whatever in them. MDMA, speed, Dexatrim, those Stacker 2 fat supplements that were really popular in the 90s. Now, it's available in powdered form, and I asked this of people, and this is just a question, does anybody actually know what color MDMA is in pure form? So the fact that I got more than one answer means we need to realize that this stuff is cut. The difference is that the biggest problem with that is that if I take MDMA cut with a stimulant, and my friend takes MDMA cut with a psychedelic, I'm going to be jittery and high energy, they're going to be tripping. But the difference with it is on the back end, we're going to both label it as MDMA. And we're going to tell people that MDMA is like that, even though I have no idea what the pure experience is, and so do not most people at this point. To have a pure drug experience is becoming increasingly privileged. And one of the biggest things, and the reason why I'm here speaking to you today, is 20 years ago, MDMA or anything else was cut with possibly an inert chemical, possibly just an over-the-counter stimulant. Now, for the first time, we're starting to see emerging trends of substances being cut with other active drugs. So basically, me and new psychedelic substances are not speaking at the moment. And the reason why is because in 2013, this is just one, there's a dozen Vice articles that talk about this, but one of the best that I'd seen was they went to the Miami Vice. And DEA said that they'd taken 106 consignments of quote-unquote Molly. And when they tested it, not only did it have 43 different unique chemicals in the pile, 19 of them the Vice chemists couldn't identify. If that doesn't terrify everyone in the room, I'm not sure how to do so. This list of chemicals, I'm going to be speaking about 3 of them, but I literally could have picked one of hundreds that now exist. To note, approximately 50 new psychedelic substances are created every year, synthesized in chemical labs in China, India, and Pakistan, shipped to the United States, the UK, Canada, and Australia, and essentially just tried. We have no idea what they do, but who knows? Could be fun. This is really recent data, as in from the Miami Ultra Music Festival 2 months ago. The Center for Forensic Science and Research Education essentially set up a booth outside of the festival, said, listen, if you want, tell us what drugs you're doing, and we'll give you $20 if you piss in a cup for us. We're not gonna arrest you, we just wanna see what it was versus what you thought it was. And basically what they found was new psychedelic substances were the largest percentage, save THC. And to explain that, they all said that they had done this stuff, but they definitely didn't say that they did the specific stuff that they found. And this is really important. 29% of the people that reported taking 29% of the people reported taking MDMA. And plenty of them, nobody said that they took the research chemical, but it was in plenty of their bloodstreams. So that means that just in case you thought like, okay, I have a great dealer, he takes care of me, this, that, and the other thing, that has nothing to do with whether you're actually gonna get it or not. You know, the majority of the people said that they were supposedly on Molly or MDMA, but they weren't. They were on something. And that was the highest sample outside of pot, which is something that we need to start being aware of, because if you don't know what you're getting, you kind of can't prepare for it. Now, to talk about some of the more famous problematic new substances. This is 25I, N-bomb, or wizard medication, as it's been called on the street. Essentially, it's a second-order chemical that was derived from 2CI. 2CI was a research chemical that was legal up into the mid-2000s that people found to be much preferable to LSD because it was less exhausting. The problem with 25I is that it's active at a microgram dosage, and people are not doing it correctly such that they hit a point of dose toxicity much more quickly than they ever would with acid. You know, LSD is something that you could drown in before it would kill you from a toxicity perspective. N-bomb has been killing people with literally a drop. You know, there are reports from many states and many countries where people have had seizures within half an hour of ingesting this substance. And, you know, one of the problems with this is it's being sold as a synthetic replacement to LSD because LSD is harder and harder to find, at least domestically. And we had this issue at Tomorrow World in Georgia last year where 8 medical transports were required because of a quote-unquote bad batch of acid. That meant it wasn't acid. And the interesting thing about that is the Woodstock picture that I showed you before, there was an announcement during Woodstock to not eat the bad acid. And the fact that we're right back there is proof that this stuff needs to be looked at and taken seriously. Additionally, this drug called alpha PVP, I'm not going to mess up pronouncing the actual chemical names so that the chemistry people in the room don't make fun of me. Basically, this was what was reported to be the substance that killed the guy, that the individual in Miami was on when he like ate that guy's face last year. He wasn't actually on it. Chemical reports came back and the dude only had marijuana in his system. But, you know, lies have a chance to go halfway around the world before truth puts its pants on. And the story stuck, and we've also had several additional reported deaths that come because not only do people take the substance purely, they also combine it with methamphetamine because, you know, I really wanted some aggressive, hyperactive stimulants, but I wanted a little more. So I'm gonna combine it with meth. Mephedrone is a synthetic replacement to MDMA that was very popular in the UK from 2010 to 2012. And this is one of the reasons that I find that the drug war is not actually relevant, because this substance only gained popularity after the purity of MDMA became like utterly garbage. And people switched to legal highs because they could buy them more cheaply. They could take them, maybe it would have the same effect. Some people actually reported preferring this because they felt that they had a lesser serotonin drop. But at the end of the day, it isn't actually any less dangerous. You know, we want to talk about this stuff because this was the original quote-unquote bath salts, and the way that they got around the fact that this was not safe for human consumption was they just labeled it as such, and you could buy it in a gas station as incense or whatever it was. when I talk about the drug war playing catch up, this is what I mean. It was internationally scheduled this month. That means that now, internationally, the substance is controlled, etc. The only problem with that is nobody does it anymore. In the UK, MDMA purity spiked back up in 2013 and 2014 to the point where now we have super strength ecstasy that's killing people in the UK again. But more specifically, nobody's doing this drug, but now the governments are becoming aware of it. And I want to specifically emphasize that we can't schedule our way out of this research chemical problem. And yes, but wait, there's more. You know, there's a couple of things that I wanted to speak about in the changing nature of the psychedelic universe when it comes to a lot of these music festivals. You know, specifically, as you know, my previous speaker said, alcohol is everywhere now. You know, you went to Grateful Dead shows, you couldn't find the volume of alcohol that you were gonna need to become belligerently drunk. Now I can get it at any music festival anywhere in the country, even at ostensibly psychedelic events. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was the intense propagation of caffeine at these parties. You know, 25 years ago, if you wanted to like get a Red Bull level of caffeine into your system, you had to drink Irish coffees for 5 hours. You had to have like Jack and Coke over and over and over again, and even then it probably wasn't possible. Now I can shotgun 2 Red Bulls and put so much caffeine in my system that it's probably gonna have tertiary effects, but whatever, you know, it's a cool thing that the kids are doing. The additional problems that I think we've also not discussed is, you know, electronic dance music events have a very, very different drug profile than psychedelic events. You know, when you look at a psychedelic event, such as a Disco Biscuits show or STS9, there's a certain kind of drug or drug profile that people are going to be attending with. You know, there's the old joke of the pot, acid, mushrooms kind of being the purview of hippies. Does anybody know what the drug profile of Electric Daisy Carnival is? Does anybody know what you take? Yeah, ecstasy, so Molly, or, you know, bath salts, cocaine, etc. What's happening is we're having a gigantic amount of dissonance between the style of music and the substance that has changed very, very quickly. And as said, you know, now there's 100,000 people at a show. So the idea that crowd control becomes much more problematic once you have large volumes of people taking questionable drugs. But yes, there is actually good news. You know, the internet has replaced the social collective that used to give you drug information. To explain this, you know, when I went to dance parties, when I kind of came up in this universe, I was educated on how to do drugs if I was going to do them by someone who was older. That was someone that had more experience, etc., just like, you know, the granny room. Now, the internet has replaced that specific individual. You know, there are people that are finding information using DanceSafe, using Stay Safe Seattle, using online resources such as Arrowhead and all of these other subreddits, etc., to get information that you may not have ever been able to find before. You know, that's the vast positive. The vast negative is now we have rampant misinformation and idiocy. You know, people talking about how important it is to get really messed up, or, you know, like going ham, as I've heard people say, which actually stands for hard as a motherfucker, just in case the rap music didn't ever make any sense. That echo chamber is more and more problematic because previously you had a cell, like a party cell of maybe 10 people, 5 people, etc. You had one person that really wanted to go out on a limb and maybe 4 other people that were like, eh. Now you have thousands of people posting Instagram pictures and tweets and Facebook posts about how messed up they are, and that aggregate data is of social pressure that we need to be cognizant of. As others have said, it's easy to go hard when everyone else is doing so. You know, additionally, how many people here on Tumblr use Tumblr as a social network? Okay, so what that's getting at is there's a level of social justice awareness and a level of intersectionality and diversity cognizance that has never really existed before. And as others have talked about when it comes to, breaking down the patriarchy, this is one of the ways this is happening. People are talking to each other in little core groups, and they're realizing that they're not alone in their viewpoints, which is tremendously necessary when you're an individual of a sexual or racial minority. And lastly, the idea that certain people can start from nothing. Like Justin Bieber was discovered by Usher because he put a drumming video on YouTube. Mdma, Porter Robinson, some of these other people were literally just plucked out of obscurity and turned into superstars because of the ability of the internet to transmit this information. But more importantly, on a different perspective, what really does make a good psychedelic event? It's important to kind of understand the difference between a good party and a great party. Because in my opinion, a good party will prevent negative actions. A great party will help people make better decisions in the future. And because of that fact, I'd like to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of dance parties, especially as they interface with drug usage and psychedelics. I have a feeling you guys know which one is which. So, in my own personal experience, good parties are something like the Pine Barrens events that I used to go to a decade ago. Basically, this was 12 hours of music in nature with a closed guest list that was invite only and as donation-based as possible. There was no bar, there was no branding, there was music, and there was the sky. And this is something that as a New Yorker, I get very, very rare chances to experience. Obviously, here it's much more prevalent, and I'm gonna pretend to not be too jealous about that. You had small, connected communities of circles of friends that came together to build this, and you also had something that I want to speak about as what I would call like element synergy. I don't know if we have any theater people in the room, but when you look at, say, for example, stage management, there's elements of sound, light, production, talent management, security, medical, etc., all this other stuff that I had mentioned, that need to be in alignment for everyone to have a good time. Because psychedelics, I've found, it's much easier to pick up dissonance when people are elevated, so they're gonna start getting confused when stuff doesn't make sense. Like, it's very easy to see an aesthetic that's totally consistent from top to bottom, but when you have someone that's on LSD or another psychedelic and they start seeing differences about stuff, that's gonna generate anxiety. And the anxiety is what's gonna generate your your adverse events. One of the other aspects of this event that was so good was, as with Burning Man and other venues and other events, participation, generosity, people walking around with fruit, cold water, etc. A very safe space that people work to protect. That, in my opinion, is a good party. A bad party is something like, say, for example, your large EDC, your large ultra music festival. I don't mean to say that these are a bad party from the perspective that you won't have a good time, because you'll have a great time. These are crazy events, you're gonna run around, have fantastic music, all of that. But from a psychedelic harm reduction perspective, the idea that there's multiple stages that you can hear simultaneously is a problem. The idea that you're gonna have a captive audience that can't bring in their own food or water such that they're subject to exploitative pricing. Such that they can't get the things they need when they need them without spending a lot of money. And what I found is that a lot of these events, you have synergy between maybe 2 to 3 elements. The music and the lighting will be on the same page. The music and the deco will be on the same page. The substance abuse mindset and the population will be on the same page. But other than that, you have jarring differences that are problematic, especially when you scale to the size of, say, for example, a Disco Biscuits show or anything, in my opinion, over a couple of hundred people. And then, of course, there is the ugly. I want to tell you a story about an event called Starscape. Starscape is an electronic dance music festival in Baltimore that existed for a couple of years in what I would describe as one of the least conducive environments to drug use I have ever seen. It was essentially stages were very distant from each other, and to get from stage to stage, you had to go through like very dark, non-lit, uneven ground paths. So that not only did you have a bunch of people falling down and messing up their ankles or whatever it was, you had people being mugged inside the venue by not just other people, but security at certain points. You had the potential for very, very negative, severely negative consequences because of the fact that there was this kind of caveat emptor, have fun, hope you know what you're doing, there's no support, and if you mess up, we're gonna arrest the crap out of you. Like that kind of thing. And thankfully, this event is no longer in operation. But independent of all of that, one of the things that I think is important to speak about is that the good, bad, and the ugly do not touch, in my opinion, the potential for the transcendent. This is a quote from Alexander Shulgin's Scale talking about if we could naturally or artificially create a repeatable experience of spirituality, we would basically be done with the human experience. That's it. That's the goal, at least according to him. And in my opinion, the good party versus the bad party is a difference between like how the group will experience things. But the transcendent experience is something that is experienced personally. And I do mean that in a way that, not to tell people that they can't maximize the event's potential for positive spiritual growth, but more that the more you focus in on giving one person a religious or spiritual experience, the less easy it is for someone else to have that. You can raise the base table stakes to give people the best options possible, but at a certain point, the individual has to take it the last mile. And to talk about, to kind of explain why, I want to tell you guys a story. I want to tell you guys a story about a place that no longer exists, but is very near and dear to my heart. It's a loft warehouse space in New York City that no longer exists. It's been replaced by an office cubicle, farm, of course. But it was a place where people felt safe and secure and comfortable because they did everything right. And I think everyone here, if you haven't experienced this, you may in the future. And if you have, you're gonna know what I'm talking about. Basically, this was an event that happened maybe 4 or 5 times a year, and it was this classic psychedelic experience where you were able to go in, no one was gonna mess with you, people didn't advertise the event, Facebook didn't exist at that point, and people were able to have the experience they wanted in a safe, non-judgmental environment, which seemed not so much rare at the time, but is more and more rare as we go on. And the way that I connected to it was through this guy. I don't know if anyone knows this cartoon, but it's one of my personal favorites. I really like the aesthetic, I like the drawing, but more specifically, there was an episode where the guy went to a rave. I mean, granted, it was a rave on an alien, universe, but it was still that. And there was a song on it that was played and then taken by one of the DJs at this event and turned into a dance track. This dance track was played while I was on the dance floor, not in a non-ordinary state, to thank the individual that preceded me. And the song was played specifically while I was wearing a shirt that had this guy on it. So I'm in an elevated universe such that surrounded by people dressed in all kinds of costumes. And as I said, all of the elements were there. The music matched the deco matched the security systems were understanding of the drug mindset that most of the people were gonna be on, but no one liked the show the way I did. And no one had the personal resonance that I did to the experience. And in that moment, I really, really thought that all of that was created for me. And I know that that's not rational, But it didn't matter, because in that moment, it was real. And that's what I'm talking about when it comes to the potential for the experience. And this is something that if you haven't experienced, I hope you get to. And I hope you go to an environment that allows it to happen. And if you have experienced it, you know that even if you do everything the same, if you go to the same party and you listen to the same music and you do the same drugs, you're not guaranteed it to happen again. And that's the concern. That's what we're going for. That's what we're reaching, as it were. And it's something that we need to kind of keep our eye on, because all of these kind of psychedelic chemicals that are coming out now are essentially not what's going to get us there. They're what people are doing anyway, because, I like to joke that if you're going to go to a party and you can't get acid or MDMA or whatever it is, you're going to find something. These people are going to be doing whatever, because nobody wants to see some of these crappy DJs sober. And, so these are a couple of things that I wanted to kind of ask to people, not because I wanted an answer specifically from you, but because I wanted to seed these questions in your mind, because your opinions on this are just as valid as mine. I have a belief that the point of interjection is the party cell, as I define it. The group of 5 to 10 people that you take drugs with, that you go to parties with, that you leave with, that you talk about this stuff with. That is where the potential for both harm reduction and best case practices when it comes to how to do this in an optimal way, as opposed to just a way that doesn't cause harm, are going to happen. I'm not going to convince anyone in here, or maybe I have, and awesome. But what's going to happen is you guys are going to sit down and you're going to talk about this stuff, maybe before you take stuff, maybe afterwards, maybe when you're just thinking about this, maybe at another meeting of GAPS. But specifically, everyone's talked about these spiritual experiences that people are having. I mean, should we even be encouraging them to have them in the first place? Is that really something that we want to do? I'm not saying that I think we shouldn't, but I'm saying that we need to ask the question to ourselves and the people we care about. The idea of discovering the transcendent or having a very powerful spiritual experience, we've been talking a little bit about the nature of spirituality and how it intersects with psychedelics. Does that really get us somewhere? Does the snapshot of an LSD trip really allow us to connect with the greater than? Or is it just a very full-featured, real feeling of bliss that may have nothing to do with the spiritual? It may just feel really amazing. And also, specifically, all of you people, how do we make sure that you are making the right decisions to have the best possible experience with as few negative consequences as possible? Because that's the goal. There's no point in doing a drug if you're going to be guaranteed to have a bad time. The thing about illegal substances is that people do them because they work. You wouldn't do them if they didn't work. So the question then becomes, why are we doing them? What do we want to get out of it? And then also specifically, how do we confirm that what we're doing is actually what we want to be doing, as per the issue with new psychedelic substances? I wanted to kind of take some time to hear from what you guys thought, but obviously for more information, the first one of these discussions is the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test book from a long time ago. If you're really interested in setting and other specific resources, feel free to take a look at the manual that Timothy Leary wrote, The Psychedelic Experience, which is based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is a little terse, but it's good if you can get into it. Obviously, online information such as trip reports, Blue Light, Arrowwood, the Neuro Soup that was created by Crystal Cole, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Obviously, you guys have an amazing resource in Stay Safe Seattle that I recommend that you use effusively, because they have a lot of the stuff that you're going to find online. And of course, feel free to use me as a resource. I don't mean this lightly, and I'm not trying to be kind of like shameless self-plugging, but I feel that it's the only way to kind of keep the conversation going is to hear from people that actually have something to say. It's much easier to kind of have your ego stroked and someone tell you that you did the right thing, but at the same time, that doesn't move the ball forward in any real meaningful way. So at this point, I'd love to hear questions, comments, concerns. Try not to throw any garbage that you guys may have. Thank you.
Can you hold your hands up again just so I can see where else I'm going to be going?
Thank you, Terry, for the presentation. So discussion of these transcendental experiences happening on the dance floor, in crowds, with others, with your group of friends, whatever. What about those solo times? What about, ingesting these substances by yourself? And does that allow also for similar experiences, similar transcendent experiences?
I mean, I obviously think so. It's definitely something that a lot of people have done and have good experiences with. But I think we also need to remind ourselves that that's a privileged experience. The idea that you're going to be able to, one, get a pure drug, B, be in an environment that you won't be disturbed in, and C, you have the pre-processing and post-processing resources to understand the experience that you had. This is one of the giant issues where you come out of this thing, you don't have anyone to talk to, and you can't do anything with it. The opposite issue is just the same. You go to Electric Zoo or any of these large events, you take acid, you have a crazy experience, and you tell your friend, and your friend's like, you were just fucked up. And the conversation ends there. Not because the person doesn't want to know, it's just that they don't want to push back against their friends. Ultimately, that's where the battleground is, to me. Because when you do it by yourself, you're taking on all of the heavy lifting. Not only the experience, but the in vivo potential that you might have a problem, and also the postpartum kind of like unpacking and repacking. We talk about the idea that psychedelics can create explosive growth, but some of them are really bad at containment. This comes from a therapeutic understanding that, like, I can't just get into something really intense with my therapist, and then at the end of the session, he just puts me out on the street. Because you can't deal with reality after that. And that's a problem that we see in a lot of these psychedelic experiences that are done in public. I think what you're getting at is very important, but we also need to understand that, say, for example, I lived in Baltimore for 6 years. I'm not taking drugs and walking around on the street. And I mean, that's cute for me, but what about the people that live there? One of the reasons why it's so difficult to hear diverse voices on this stuff is, especially once you go under a certain socioeconomic class, it's not an option. I'm not doing LSD in Camden, New Jersey. There's in the same way that people will naturally have guards up in places where they should. I think it's much more possible for you to have the individual experience that you're looking for because you can control every facet of the experience. Granted, some people can control every part of the experience and then mess it up. So, your mileage may vary. And that's the point. It's really about the work that you can do individually, but also then just because you have that experience doesn't mean that anyone else in that specific environment will have the same. Thanks.
Hi, it was a great talk. And about this topic of diversity and psychedelics, I was hoping you could speak about the genetic differences if you maybe come across in, say, certain ethnicities and their psychedelic experience. For myself, I'm of a Scandinavian background, and so for me, that Finnish ancestry came up heavy in my experience. And traditionally, ancestry is very much a part of, in certain cultures, the experience. Do different ethnicities have different psychedelic experiences, in your belief?
I mean, honestly, I don't think we have the primary data. I can speculate and say that, we forget that marijuana and hashish are very, very light hallucinogens as opposed to, psychedelics, as opposed to depressants, which is the way that they're usually classified. So, I mean, there are stories of Bedouin tribes using them as in-group creators and ways to kind of create a deeper lattice network between their communities. In the Ibogaine universe, people in sub-Saharan Africa use the Ibogaine experience as teenagers to ritually bond teenagers to the land. These are people that are 13, 14 years old, and they have essentially ancestral recall while they have the experience. And I believe that's something that it's as much genetics as it is environment, because say, for example, there's this wonderful piece of schizophrenia research that shows that 50 years ago, 60 years ago, schizophrenic hallucinations, auditory and visual, had to do with ghosts and spirits, etc. But now if you look at modern schizophrenic patients, they talk about the voices they're hearing being because of microchips or satellites and all of this kind of stuff. So we need to be cognizant of the surroundings that are really being, that are amplifying these previous experiences. I think what you're getting at is very interesting, but because of the fact that psychedelic usage isn't, it's not out, we don't really have the pilot data and the demographic information to get at it. Additionally, psychedelics are tremendously privileged. The idea that, you can be messed up or, gullible for 8 hours is kind of a stunning idea to someone who has to work 2 jobs in a neighborhood that they don't feel safe in. So when getting into the differences, I don't want to go out on a limb and say that it's genetic when it could just be that, like, I have a different trip because I'm scared of, like, gunshots or something like that. And I think that that's something that hopefully we're going to see coming out as it becomes more popular in less stupendously privileged areas.
Thank you.
Great. Who else has questions? Okay.
Hi, thanks. You're awesome. That was awesome. Also, I had a question kind of piggybacking off of your response and what you've been talking about in terms of the psychedelic use and at like a big rave and something like that is inherently a privileged experience. And I guess my question is, when it comes to harm reduction, how do you see like an awareness of privilege, and how do you believe that fits into like harm reduction at both like the level of your what you call like the party cell and also the level of like being in a broader community, and then also maybe in areas where like more dangerous areas and we're dealing with psychedelic experiences among people who are more low income. Like, do you think that there are other things that should be kept in mind when doing harm reduction that aren't kept in mind by people who don't think about those things?
I think there's a very interesting happy medium that we're starting to see in between Zendo and DanceSafe, where psychedelic harm reduction is very necessary, but in a lot of these events, you're going to see a very low usage of psychedelics. You're going to see a lot more cocaine. You're going to see a lot more what I would say is cut MDMA, but cut with a stimulant, not so much a psychedelic. And because of that fact, it really gets down to understanding the population. The DanceSafe chapters in different cities really need to be focusing on the different drug, arrays that exist in places. I volunteer at DanceSafe in New York, and I can tell you that just as was described before, the majority of the issues that we have to deal with are alcohol and poorly cut MDMA. That's because that could be for a number of reasons. The idea that at a certain point, crazy dance parties don't make the most sense if you want to get really elevated when it comes to a psychedelic. Some people are making this decision correctly, others are not. I think when it gets to the individual connection, person to person, we have a lot of work to do when it comes to unlearning the bravado of substance usage. The idea of getting really messed up has very wildly different connotations when it just comes to doing lines of cocaine for 7 hours. That's something that you can kind of maintain a certain level of messed up that's not going to cause psychotic breaks, etc. I mean, granted, obviously we have the entire universe of methamphetamine to contradict me on that. But from the individual perspective, it really comes with, Arrowwood says it the best: know your source, know your substance, know yourself, know your setting. And that kind of thing is more of a cultural shift in these communities where you have bravado, where you have keeping up with the Joneses, where you have a less in touch with themselves population. And because of that fact, I think that sometimes maybe cart before horse kind of thing when it comes to, psychedelic harm reduction is really helpful, but if everyone at your party is still drinking and doing coke, Zendo maybe shouldn't be wasting their time there. I think that that's maybe for a more frontline harm reduction, something like Dance Safe, or even something like Crowd RX or something like that.
It was a great speech. I was wondering, do you think the pure versions of these substances will ever come back into today's society, or the society leaning more towards whatever they can throw in the compound or drug?
So there's a story that I have that's directly related to that. A friend of mine was he was a doctor that was working in Baltimore at the National Institutes of Drug Abuse, NIDA. And he was doing exploratory imaging research on cocaine users. So they were taking cocaine addicts off of the street, giving them clinical grade cocaine, and then putting them in an MRI. And after that, they're doing the breakdown. And this guy said, I want to thank you. And the doctor had no idea, what are you thanking me for? And he said, I've never had that experience. I'm never going to have it again. There's no reason for me to waste my time with this anymore. And I think we need to kind of understand that without drug policy reform and without the war on drugs actually being addressed, this stuff is never going to be pure again. And I think we need to understand that we're going to start seeing a stratification where individuals that have more privilege, resources, et cetera, are going to start getting almost exclusively the pure substances, while individuals that don't have that access, that don't have that resources, are going to find themselves doing purely new psychedelic substances and MDMA replacements. Especially some of the research that's coming out now. A lot of the chemicals that are in a lot of these poor communities are entirely not pure. When something is 95% not the drug that you want, it's a completely different experience. So that means that we're going to start seeing people having different experiences depending on how much money they have, which is very panic-inducing to me. Because I find that, no matter how rich you are, or how low you are, or how poor you are, acid lays you the same level of low. And that's something that we need to kind of keep in the back of our mind. I think that's it. Thank you very much. And I'll be happy to answer everything else, online or something like that. Thank you.